There's a moment, and I mean a very specific, bone-freezing, stomach-dropping kind of moment, when every living thing in a room goes completely, utterly silent. Not the polite silence of a library. Not the respectful silence of a funeral. The other kind. The kind where instinct takes over and every rational thought your brain has ever produced gets shoved into a corner because something primal in your chest just said, "Pay attention. Right now. Something is about to happen that you will never, ever forget." I've felt that silence twice in my life. The first time was when I was 9 years old and my father's fishing boat got caught on the edge of a tropical storm off the coast of Mindanao. I remember the exact second the ocean stopped being ordinary. The water just flattened, went still, and every fisherman on that boat stopped talking mid-sentence, not because they agreed to, not because someone told them to, because something in the air changed and every human animal instinct fired at once. The second time was in the HFY corridor. And that one was louder. That one, I swear to every god of every species who will listen, that one shook the stars. My name is Corporal Dallas A. Reyes. Serial number H7741, Reyes D. Philippine Marine Expeditionary Brigade, 14th Combined Arms Battalion, Echo Company, 3rd Platoon, 2nd Squad. I was 26 years old. I had been in the Galactic Cooperative Defense Force for 8 months. I had been deployed to the HFY corridor for 11 days. And on the 12th day, someone up the chain called in reinforcements. They asked for reinforcements. They got an entire human battalion. This is what happened. This is what I saw. This is what I will swear happened because I was there and my hands still shake a little when I think about it, and I don't care who knows that. This is the truth. Set up. You have to understand what the HFY corridor actually is before any of this makes sense. Most people, most human people, only know it from the news feeds that cycle through the cooperative's public channels, and the news feeds make it look like a contested stretch of space. Cold statistics, fleet movements, graphs with little colored arrows, very clean, very distant. Being there is not like that. The corridor is okay. Try to picture this. You know how on Earth there are these stretches of land that people have been fighting over for 10,000 years. Valleys between mountain ranges where invading armies have marched and bled since before anyone invented writing. Places where the ground itself seems to hold onto something, some weight, some memory, that makes the air taste different. The HFY corridor is that, except it's in space. And it's a dense nebular passage about 11 light-minutes wide at its narrowest point, threading between the Vethcon hegemony's outer systems and the cooperative's protected trade lanes. It's thick with ionized gas clouds that scramble most long-range sensor arrays. It's full of asteroid clusters that make standard ship navigation a nightmare. And it has had, I should say, had 17 inhabited outpost stations scattered along its length like beads on a string, each one a refueling depot, a relay station, or a small colony settlement for species who'd been living there before either the hegemony or the cooperative decided the corridor mattered. The Vethcon had been pressuring those stations for about a decade, economically first, then diplomatically, then with what the cooperative politely called unauthorized military escort vessels sailing through without permission. Then 14 months before I got there, they stopped being polite about any of it. 3 stations went dark inside of a week, not destroyed, occupied. The Vethcon moved in ground forces, or what passed for ground forces with them, because the Vethcon don't actually move on the ground the way we do. They're tri-limbed, semi-aquatic in their natural state, and their military doctrine involves flooding pressurized corridors with breathable liquid and moving through it in sealed exosuits. Which sounds strange until you're the one trying to defend against it, at which point it stops being strange and becomes a very immediate tactical problem. The cooperative sent peacekeepers first. The Marathi sent a diplomatic frigate and a small security detail. the Zelthrans sent 2 companies of their standard infantry. The Cooperative's Joint Command sent a multi-species quick response battalion with orders to observe and deter. None of it deterred anything. By the time I arrived with Echo Company, 5 of the 17 stations were under Vethcon control. 3 others had evacuated. The remaining 9 were holding, but barely, and the mood across the cooperative defensive lines was a very specific flavor of desperate that I'd never smelled before but recognized immediately when I got close enough to it. Desperate with nowhere to run. Desperate with orders that didn't match the situation on the ground. Desperate with the knowledge that the thing you're protecting matters, but the people making decisions about it have never once stood where you're standing. We set up in Outpost Halcyon Station Designation OKV-9, the 9th in the chain, sitting at roughly the midpoint of the corridor's navigable length. It was a converted mineral processing platform. Old, big, ugly. The kind of structure built to last and not to be pretty about it. All exposed metal framework and thick blast plating and corridors wide enough to move heavy equipment through. It smelled like machine oil and recycled atmosphere, and about 14 different species worth of food and cleaning chemicals. And it was, I'm going to say this honestly, it was home within about 48 hours because that's what happens when you're scared in a place long enough. It becomes yours. Echo Company shared Outpost Halcyon with 2 other units. First was a Zelthran infantry platoon, 42 soldiers of what I can only describe as one of the most quietly, professionally stoic species I've ever encountered. The Zelthran are big. Not the biggest species in the cooperative, but solidly large. They average about 2¼ meters, built wide through the shoulder and the hip, with that characteristic gray-blue coloring, and the double-jointed legs that make them look wrong when they stand still and absolutely terrifying when they move fast. Their lead NCO was someone they called Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel. He didn't talk much. He communicated mostly through the quality of his silences, which ranged from, "I have noted this and found it acceptable," to "I have noted this and am choosing not to comment yet," to "I have noted this and something is about to change." I learned to read those silences pretty quick. Second was a Marethi communications and intelligence team. 8 individuals, all specialists, none of them fighters in the conventional sense. The Marethi are small and quick, and they think very fast forearmed, with those big, light-sensitive eyes that make them look perpetually startled. And their intelligence officer was a woman named Analyst Velsanath who had more information running through her head at any given moment than most computers I've used, and who, the first time she met me, shook one of my hands with 2 of her 4 hands simultaneously and said, "In excellent standard, you are a human. I've read extensively about your species. The literature is contradictory. I look forward to resolving the contradictions empirically." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "Good to meet you too, ma'am." She blinked those huge eyes at me. The honorific is unnecessary but noted. So that was the crew at OKV-9. 1 human company, 1 Zelthran platoon, 1 Marethi intel team. Defending a converted mineral processing platform at the midpoint of the most contested stretch of space in the sector, with orders to hold the station, maintain the corridor's navigability for cooperative vessels. And I'm quoting the official orders here, because they handed them to us on actual printed polymer sheets like this was the old days. To avoid escalatory actions while maintaining a credible deterrent posture. Sergeant First Class Evangelina Cortez, our platoon sergeant, read those orders aloud to us the first morning we were on station. Then she folded the sheet. Then she looked at us. Then she said, "Right. Let's figure out what the hell we actually have to work with." That was my introduction to the Kethvora corridor. The world of OKV-9. Let me tell you about what 11 days on that station actually felt like, because stories like this, the ones where things eventually explode into something historic, they always skip the in-between. They cut from arrival to crisis. And that's not how it works. That's not how any of it works. The in-between matters. The in-between is where you learn what everyone's made of. The days were long, not in the clock sense. The station kept a standard 32-hour cooperative cycle, but in the way that tension makes time elastic. 4 hours of watch felt like 8. Sleep felt like nothing. The cycles blurred into each other. Our section of the station was Deck 7, which had originally been the platform's primary or processing bay before it was converted. High ceilings, cold. The environmental systems kept it about 4 degrees cooler than comfortable, which someone up the chain apparently decided was acceptable, and which everyone on Deck 7 definitely decided was not. But no one had the administrative energy to file the right request form to get it changed. So we all just layered up and complained about it with the kind of low-grade perpetual unhappiness that bonds soldiers together better than almost anything else. We set up our cots in the eastern section of the bay. The Zelthran had the western section. The Marethi intel team had commandeered a smaller adjacent room. They needed the quiet and the data access, and I think a break from the combined smell of 2 mammalian species in an enclosed space, though they were too polite to say that directly. The Zelthran didn't interact with us much the first few days. Not hostility, they were never hostile, just reserve. They ate together. They ran their PT routines together. They maintained their weapons and their equipment in organized, methodical silence. Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel would nod to me when we passed in the corridor. That was it for days 3 and 4. Day 5, Private First Class Marco Delacroix, who was from New Orleans, which I mention because it is relevant to what happened next, decided to cook. Marco had somehow gotten his hands on, or fabricated from what was available in the station's food stores, enough ingredients to make something resembling gumbo. Not real gumbo, a version of gumbo, a gesture toward gumbo, assembled from whatever starches and protein compounds and flavoring agents the station's kitchen stores had available. He made it in one of the big industrial pots from the station's cafeteria kitchen. He made an enormous amount of it. He didn't ask permission. He didn't tell anyone he was doing it. He just started cooking. And it smelled incredible. I don't know what the Zelthran equivalent of something smells incredible is neurologically. But I watched 4 of them drift toward the cafeteria door with a slightly confused, slightly compelled expression of creatures whose senses had registered something interesting before their conscious minds had formed an opinion about it. Marco fed them. He didn't make a thing of it. He just kept ladling portions into whatever containers people held out. The Zelthran ate standing up, in the careful, considering way of species trying something new, and after about 30 seconds of evaluation, Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel looked at Marco Delacroix with an expression that I can only describe as revised assessment and said, in serviceable standard, "This is unexpected." Marco said, "Thank you, Sergeant Prime." "It is not a compliment yet," Oveth said. "It is an observation." He ate 2 more bowls before deciding it was a compliment. After that, the Zelthran talked to us. Not in a flood, they were never a flood of words kind of people, but in the measured, deliberate way of soldiers who have decided you're worth the effort. We learned their names. We learned a bit about their home systems. Private Kelev, the youngest of their group, was fascinated by human teeth, specifically the canines, in a way that he couldn't entirely explain and that we all decided was charming rather than concerning. Corporal Mara, who was female and senior among the enlisted Zelthran, had a dry, flat sense of humor that required about a 3-second delay to fully register, but was absolutely worth the wait. Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel told exactly 1 story about himself in 11 days, but the story was about the first time he'd faced a Vethcon advance, and the way he told it, quietly, without drama, looking at the space between his big hands, made everyone at the table go very still. "They flooded the corridor," he said. "The pressurized liquid, standard doctrine for them, we had not trained for it. We lost 6 soldiers in 4 minutes." A pause. We did not lose any more after that, but we lost 6 first. Another pause. That is the cost of being unprepared. I think about it often. No one said anything for a moment. Sergeant Cortez said, "Yeah, that's what it costs." Oveth nodded. That was the end of the story. The tension built in layers. That's the other thing no one tells you. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates. Day 6. One of the Marethi communication relay arrays registered an unauthorized signal burst from the direction of the hegemony-controlled stations. Analyst Velsanath flagged it immediately, ran it through 4 different filter protocols, and concluded it was likely a standard military positional update, the kind of routine data packet that military units transmit constantly. But the transmission strength was high, higher than standard. High enough that it could have been bouncing to multiple receivers simultaneously. Like someone was telling a lot of people exactly where they were standing. Day 8. 2 of our long-range optical sensors, the ones positioned on the station's outer hull, went offline simultaneously. Cascade failure, the initial diagnosis said. Electrical system issue consistent with the station's age. Probably. Day 9. A cooperative patrol shuttle on the outer corridor run reported what they filed as a sensor ghost, a brief return that could have been a ship, could have been a large asteroid, could have been an artifact of the nebular gas scrambling the arrays. Filed under inconclusive, monitoring continues. Day 10. Sergeant First Class Cortez pulled the section leaders together in the small planning room off Deck 7 and put all 3 of those data points on the table at once. Individually, she said, any of these is normal. Maybe all 3 together is normal, but I don't like the feel of it. She looked around the table. What are we hearing from the other stations? Our communications specialist Tanaka Hiroshi, pulled up the traffic. OKV-7 and OKV-8 both flagged increased Vethcon patrol activity along the outer corridor edge. OKV-11 reported a pressurized corridor breach attempt. They said it was repelled, no casualties, classified as a probe. A probe, Cortez said. That's what they called it. They probe you when they're mapping your defenses, Oveth said from the corner. He'd been invited to these section leader meetings starting on day 7. He sat very still in a chair that was visibly too small for him. They probe multiple points simultaneously, so the data is comparative. What they learn at one station they apply to the others. Analyst Velsanath was also in the room. She pulled a data slate from somewhere on her person. The Marethi always had data slates somewhere on their person and said, "If I correlate the timing of the signal burst with the probe attempt at OKV-11 and the sensor failures here," she trailed off, running numbers. "Then, the timing is consistent with a coordinated reconnaissance sweep. I would put the probability at around 73%, acknowledging significant uncertainty in that figure." Cortez nodded. "What are they building toward?" Velsanath was quiet for a moment. "In the Vethcon doctrine I've studied, a comprehensive reconnaissance sweep of this kind typically precedes a consolidation push. They identify the weakest links in the defensive chain and concentrate force there. If they've identified OKV-9 as a weak point." "We're 112 soldiers," Cortez said flatly. "Of course we're a weak point." A moment of quiet in the room. "I'll send a situation report up the chain," Cortez said. "I'll flag it as elevated. I'll request additional assets." She did. The response came back the next morning. Joint Command acknowledged the report, assessed the intelligence as consistent with ongoing Vethcon probing activity, described as within the expected parameters of current tensions. Noted that additional assets were under evaluation given current deployment demands across the corridor. Advised to maintain vigilance and continue to document anomalous activity. Cortez read the response. She folded it the same way she'd folded the orders. Then she didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Okay, we do this ourselves. Everyone on 2/3 standby starting tonight, armor staged, weapons hot, full load bearing, everybody eats in their gear. We're not getting caught flat. That was day 11. Build tension. Day 12 started at 300 station time. I was on the 3rd watch cycle, posted at the junction of Corridor D7 and the main transit hub of Deck 7, which was the most defensible interior position we had if something came in through the outer hull access points. It was cold. It was quiet. Specialist Tanaka was 200 meters away at the comm station. Private First Class Rays, different Rays, Benicio Rays from Iloco's North. A coincidence that had entertained the whole section for about 3 days, was at the junction's opposite end. I was awake, mostly because I'd been drinking the station's coffee, which tasted like warm metal and willpower, and partly because the thing analyst Vel Sanath had said the previous afternoon was still running in the back of my head. They identify the weakest links in the defensive chain and concentrate force there. I was thinking about that when my earpiece crackled. All units OKV-9, Cortez's voice. Even and careful the way voices get when the speaker has information that is bad but specific, and specific is better than vague, and she was holding herself steady. Outer hull sensors 3 and 4 just came back online. They're reading multiple contacts. Outer corridor perimeter bearing 047 relative. Count is... A pause, long enough for me to feel it in my chest. Count is uncertain. Grid saturation is significant. I need everyone at their secondary posts. Right now. This is not a drill. I say again, this is not a drill. I was moving before she finished the sentence. Not running. Running gets you killed in corridors. You arrive gasping, off balance, not ready. Moving, controlled, the way you practice. The way Cortez had us practicing from day one, because Cortez had been in the Cooperative Defense Force for 14 years before she was ever stationed on a multi-species deployment, and she had opinions about how you moved under threat, and none of those opinions involved panic. I hit my secondary post, the portside interior barrier, 2 meters of blastrated plating we'd stacked against the main cargo bay door, and found Corporal Edson Vieira already there, already set, already checking his sightlines with the calm, almost mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Vieira was from Florianopolis, and he had a stillness about him that I'd always found reassuring. He was still. "You hear the count?" I asked him. "She said uncertain," he said. "Yeah. Uncertain is bad." "Yeah." We set up. Through my earpiece I could hear the rest of the company filtering into position, the NCOs checking in, the confirmation codes, the tight, controlled murmur of 112 people getting ready for something they weren't sure of yet but knew was coming. Then analyst Vel Sanath's voice on the shared channel. OKV-9, this is Marethi Intelligence. I have cleaned up the sensor returns. I am... A pause. I am reading 47 discrete contacts on initial analysis. Revision upward as the processing completes. 47. We had 112. 47 and climbing, she said 30 seconds later. 69 contacts. Continuing to climb. 84. Cortez's voice, Vel. Stop when you have a high confidence number. I understand. A longer pause, the sound of data processing on her end. Then, high confidence count is 106 vessels, mix of personnel carriers and combat units. Vethcon markings consistent with their consolidation fleet configuration. A breath. This is not a probe. I heard Cortez's exhale through the earpiece. Very quiet, very even. 106 vessels. Against our single station with 112 defenders. I looked at Vieira. He was looking at the cargo bay door. I said, "She's going to call for reinforcements." He said, "Yes, she is." "You think anyone comes?" He was quiet for a second. "Someone always comes," he said. I don't know if he believed that. I didn't know if I did either. What I knew was that the cargo bay door was blast-rated to 700 kilopascals, and the Vethcon pressurized corridor assault method operated at roughly 1200, which meant that door was going to hold for maybe 2 breaches before it started to matter less. Cortez's voice came on the open channel, full unit broadcast. "Okay, V9, this is your commanding officer. Here is what we know. There is a Vethcon consolidation fleet element, 106 vessels, currently on approach to this station. ETA to docking range is approximately 40 minutes. I have sent an emergency priority request to Joint Command for immediate reinforcement. I have also sent requests on the emergency protocols to every other cooperative unit in communication range." A pause. "Here is what we are going to do. We are going to hold this station. We have prepared for this. Every one of you knows your assignment. Every one of you knows your position. This station has civilians in sections 9 and 11, families, workers, people who came here to live in the corridor and did not expect a war, and we are going to make sure that none of them are handed over to a Vethcon consolidation force. That is the job. That is the only thing that matters right now." Her voice shifted, just slightly, just enough. "I know we are outnumbered. I know the numbers look bad. I have been outnumbered before. In my experience, numbers are just where the conversation starts. In the cargo bay, in the cold, with my hands on my weapon. I thought she's right. I really hope she's right. I thought 40 minutes. And then I thought about what Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel had said. That is the cost of being unprepared. We were prepared. That had to count for something. The waiting. 38 minutes. 36. The Vethcon fleet held a distance for the first part of the approach. That's standard for their doctrine. Vel Sanath had briefed us on this 2 days ago, because she briefed us on everything she knew, quietly and thoroughly, in the manner of someone who believes that information is the most useful thing one person can give another. They hold a distance while their lead elements conduct final mapping of the station's exterior. They identify docking points, weak hull sections, atmosphere venting systems. They are methodical, they are patient. They have, historically, had the luxury of patience. The waiting was harder than I expected it to be, and I had expected it to be very hard. I could hear through the hull, faintly, the way you hear thunder starting far off, the proximity alarms of the station's automated outer defense systems beginning to register contacts. Not urgent yet, just present, there is something out there and it is getting closer. Private First Class Benicio Reyes came to join us at the cargo bay barrier. He'd been reassigned from the junction when Cortez consolidated the inner defensive line. He slid in beside Vieira, checked his weapon, and said, with an air of profound calm, "You think the gumbo recipe survived? Marco stored it somewhere." Vieira looked at him. "I'm asking," Benicio said, "because if we get through this, somebody should make it again. It was good." "Marco stored it on the section comm pad," I said. Benicio nodded. "Good, that's good." We were quiet for a second. "I'm not actually thinking about gumbo," Benicio said. "I know," I said. "Just so you know, I know." "Yeah." We waited. 22 minutes out, the response from Joint Command came through on Cortez's command channel. I heard her voice change as she read it, or rather I heard her voice not change, which is what I mean by change, because when someone is holding their voice in a deliberate neutral, you can hear the edges of the hold. She came on the unit channel. "Joint Command has received our emergency request. They are assessing. Available forces in the region are currently engaged at OKV-7 and OKV-12. A beat. They are working to identify what can be reallocated." Assessing. Working to identify. Vieira made a sound that was not quite a word. Mara, the Zelthran corporal, was at our barrier position. She'd moved through 30 seconds ago, setting up on the opposite side of the bay door. She heard the update. She said nothing, but she checked her weapon with slightly more deliberate care than the situation required. Ovath's voice on the channel: "We have held positions under worse." Flat, even, informational, not reassuring. The Zelthran version of reassurance, maybe. 15 minutes. Velsonoth, Fleet Configuration Update. I am detecting separation of the lead elements. 11 vessels breaking from the main body. These are their rapid insertion carriers. They will move to docking positions while the combat units maintain standoff. Standard consolidation pattern. First contact will be at the outer docking rings. A pause. I estimate 8 minutes to first contact. 8 minutes. Cortez, all units confirm readiness. The acknowledgements came in, steady, quick. Every section, every position, every person. 112 voices in 8 seconds, all of them steady. I added mine. 7 minutes. 6. The hull vibration changed. I felt it through the soles of my boots, through the palm of my hand resting against the blast plating. The station was shivering. A very faint, low-frequency tremor that was the Vethcon vessel's proximity drives interacting with the station's own gravitational field. Like the whole structure was aware of them now. Like it was bracing. 5 minutes. And then Specialist Tanaka's voice, sharp, not quite urgent yet but on the edge. "Sergeant Cortez, I'm picking up something on the long-range comms array. It's coming in on the cooperative military emergency band." "What is it?" "I'm trying to clean it up. It's coming in fast. It's a compressed packet. The encryption key is..." A pause, the sound of him working. "It's a military positioning broadcast. Cooperative, but the unit identifier doesn't match anything in my current recognition table." "What unit identifier?" "Bravo 19er actual." And the sound of him typing. "And a following identifier I'm reading as Charlie Company, 14th Combined Arms. And Sergeant, there are more. Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo, that's us, Foxtrot Ghost Hotel." He stopped. "Tanaka," Cortez said. "Sergeant," he said, I think there are a lot of them. I think I'm reading a full battalion spread." Silence. For about 3 seconds, nobody said anything. Then Corporal Vieira next to me, very quietly, "Someone came." Climax Part 1, the sound before the sight. I heard them before I saw anything. I need you to understand that, because it matters. The sound came first, and the sound was, I've been trying to describe this since it happened, and I've had months, and I still haven't found the right words, but I'll try. It was not the sound of ships arriving. Ships arriving sound like thrust adjustments and proximity alarms and the mechanical grinding of docking clamps engaging. They sound like industry, like technology. This sounded like something else. The comms array first, static resolving into signal, signal resolving into voices, dozens of them, all on the military coordination band, all overlapping in the first second before the encryption protocols sorted them into their correct channels and streams. Voices calling in positions, voices acknowledging. The terse, efficient music of a military unit moving. Then the hull. The hull of the station went from a shiver to a vibration to, I don't know, something like resonance. Something like the whole structure was being asked to hold itself steady against an enormous pressure of arrival. Not violence, not the hammering of weapons impact, just presence. The physical presence of a lot of mass arriving at once, close, in ordered configuration. Velsonoth's voice, and for the first time since I'd known her there was something in it I hadn't heard before. Something that, in a human, I'd have called wonder. I am reading new contacts, cooperative IFF signals, human vessel configuration, multiple, very multiple. Her voice broke off. She came back. I am reading 67 cooperative combat vessels, 67, she paused. And they are not in the corridor. They are in the corridor. They came through the outer nebular band, the route that is not a route. the one that standard navigation considers. "Vel," Cortez said, "what are we seeing?" "They flew through the gas clouds," Vel'Sanath said, "without long-range sensor coverage in formation, a formation of 67 vessels." A pause. "That should not be possible." In the cargo bay, Vieira looked at me. "Should not," he said quietly, "is not the same as is not." I pressed my hand flat against the blast plating. The resonance was there, strong, getting stronger. And then, on the outer corridor sensors, which were now fully live and streaming to every unit's tactical display, I saw them. They came out of the nebular gas clouds like they'd been waiting in there, like the clouds had held them, hidden them, and then simply let them go. They came out fast. Human ships move differently than most cooperative vessels. It's a thing the other species notice immediately when they first see it. Cooperative standard fleet doctrine is precision formation, tight, symmetrical, defined spacing between vessels maintained to a very exact degree. It looks impressive. It looks controlled. It communicates order. Human fleet movement, especially human military fleet movement, at speed with an immediate tactical objective, looks like controlled chaos, and it is not chaos at all. The ships come in with the aggressive, slightly ragged confidence of something that has done this before and knows it can do it again. And the geometry is constantly shifting, constantly adjusting, and only resolves into pattern when you watch long enough to understand what the pattern is for. The pattern was, get between the Vethkon fleet and the station. 67 vessels moving at flank approach speed, out of the nebular cloud that wasn't a navigable route, directly into the gap between OKV-9 and the Vethkon consolidation fleet. Into it. Not forming up on the flanks, not approaching from a supporting angle, straight into the gap, straight between. The Vethkon lead formation had 11 rapid insertion carriers moving toward our docking rings. 3 of them had already made contact. I could hear the outer hull alarm systems registering attachment attempts. The other 8 were in final approach. The human ships hit the gap at minute 3 of their emergence from the clouds. And then a voice came over the cooperative military emergency band. Not encrypted, not coded, open broadcast, the kind of transmission you send when you want everyone to hear it, and the voice said, "All Vethkon vessels, this is Commodore Adiz Akafar of the Human Combined Arms Battalion 14th, operating under Cooperative Emergency Authority Protocol 7. You are currently in unauthorized proximity to Cooperative Station OKV-9 and engaging in prohibited boarding actions against a defended civilian and military installation. You are instructed to disengage all boarding elements, withdraw your vessels to a distance of no less than 40 kilometers, and open communications on this channel." A pause. "This instruction is not a negotiation. This is your one opportunity to make a decision that does not end badly for you." Silence on the channel. Vel'Sanath's voice, in a tone I hadn't heard from her before. "The Vethkon fleet lead is holding position." "They're not disengaging," Tanaka said. "Cortez, how long since the instruction?" 12 seconds, Tanaka said. "Cortez and the battalion." "Tanaka, they are not holding position." Climax Part 2, What Arrival Looks Like. "I'm going to tell you what I saw on the tactical display because it is the clearest thing I have. And I'm going to tell you what I felt watching it because the feeling is what made it real." The 67 human vessels stopped being a formation and became something else. They spread, not randomly, with absolute terrifying purpose. The geometry of it was, you know how sometimes you watch something happen and your brain is a step behind because what you're seeing is faster than what you expected. It was like that. The spread was over in about 90 seconds, and in those 90 seconds the 67 ships went from a concentrated mass to a three-dimensional envelope surrounding the Vethkon fleet's forward elements, and the immediate approaches to OKV-9. Not blocking. Enveloping. There is a difference. Blocking puts a wall in the way. Enveloping makes the wall irrelevant because there is no angle from which the wall is not in front of you. The Vethcon rapid insertion carriers that had been approaching our docking rings, they stopped. I watched them stop on the display. Vectors zeroing. The boarding action on the outer hull, the one Cortez had alerted 2 sections to respond to, the attachment signatures went to standby. Then Commodore Akaffer's voice again, still open channel. Still utterly calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of urgency, but the complete, deliberate mastery of it. Vethcon lead element. You have had 30 seconds. My formation is now in position. I will not make this instruction a third time. Withdraw your vessels and open communications, or we will resolve this situation in a way that is significantly more inconvenient for everyone involved, with the specific asymmetry that it will be considerably more inconvenient for you. Velsanath, Vethcon fleet is they are maneuvering. The main body is a pause. They're backing up. Tanaka, fleet-wide vector shift. I'm reading it as a tactical withdrawal. Standard doctrine for when. He stopped. When what? Cortez said. When you find yourself enveloped by a force you didn't expect and didn't account for. The 3 rapid insertion carriers that had attached to the outer hull were still there, locked on. The others had pulled back. The 3 that had attached, they were the ones where the boarding actions had actually initiated, where the Vethcon soldiers in their pressurized exosuits had already moved into the connecting tubes. On the outer hull, on our station, 3 insertion points. Cortez's voice. We still have 3 boarders in the system. Inner hull, access points Delta 3, Delta 5, and Echo 2. All responding units stay on those positions. We handle our own house. Oveth's voice. We are at Delta 5. 3 other confirmations. Mine, Echo 2, Vieira and Ray's with me. The hull alarm at Echo 2 changed pitch. The connecting tube was pressurizing. They were pushing the liquid through, the breathable liquid that their exosuits operated in, the medium that their doctrine was built around, filling the space between the outer hull and the first interior door. Here they come, Vieira said. He was very steady. I was not unscared. I was scared. I want to be clear about that because anyone who tells you they weren't scared at that moment was not paying sufficient attention to the situation. But the scared was a manageable thing, a present thing, something to note and set to one side and then focus on the door. The interior door began to show stress indicators. 1200 kilopascals. The blast plating was rated to 700. When that door goes, I said, and I heard myself saying it, heard my own voice, and it was steadier than I expected, we funnel them to the barrier. Don't let them spread into the bay. Understood, Vieira said. Understood, Benicio said. The door went. Not catastrophically. Not in one instant. It failed from the lower hinge point first, the pressure finding the weakest point, the metal distorting in slow motion that was faster than slow motion, the seal breaking, and the breathable liquid that the Vethcon used flooding in at floor level, spreading across the deck plating in a thin, fast-moving sheet. They came through it. 3 of them in the first wave. Exosuits moving through the flooded space with the efficient, flowing grace of something that had evolved in liquid and understood it the way we understand air. The suits they were big, not as big as Zelthrin, but big and fast, moving faster than you expected for their size. I fired. The weapon I was carrying was a cooperative standard kinetic pulse rifle, adapted for multi-environment use, which included aquatic assault conditions. Cortez had made sure everyone had the right equipment. That is the cost of being unprepared. We were prepared. The first 2 shots I fired were not clean. I'll say that honestly. I was compensating for the liquid on the deck, and for the movement pattern of the exosuit and the adrenaline doing what adrenaline does to fine motor control. The third shot was clean. It hit the suit at the joint articulation point on the right limb assembly, the spot that Vel Sanoth had briefed us on, the weak point in the exosuit's armor rating. The reason you didn't aim center mass because center mass on Vethcon assault exosuits was reinforced to a rating that kinetic pulse didn't penetrate. The suit seized. The Vethcon soldier inside it, I could see through the visor. Those flat, triple-pupilled eyes froze as the articulation locked, and then fell sideways into the liquid on the deck. Vieira had the second one. Benicio had the third. There were 6 more in the tube. We held the barrier. The liquid was rising at my ankles now, cold through my boots, and I was thinking about footing, thinking about cover, thinking about the tube behind those 6 and how many more were in it. And then through the hull, louder now, more than vibration, almost sound, I felt the battalion. Not saw, not heard, felt. Something that translated through 67 vessels and the connecting structure of the docking envelope and the station's own frame as a kind of pressure. A presence. An enormous, distributed, completely deliberate weight that said, "We are here. We are all of us here, and we have not come here to watch." The 6 soldiers in the tube stopped moving forward. I don't know if they had comms with the main fleet. I don't know if they received an order to hold, but they stopped. And the liquid stopped rising, and the tube pressure equalized. I kept my weapon up. Vieira kept his up. Benicio kept his up. 38 seconds. Then the soldiers in the tube began moving backward. Climax Part 3. What they found on the other side. The boarding actions all terminated within 6 minutes. 6 minutes after the battalion's envelope formation locked in, all 3 insertion teams withdrew. The rapid insertion carriers detached from the outer hull. The main fleet body, which had already been in withdrawal vector, increased its retreat pace to what Vel Sanoth described as deliberate haste, not a rout, but faster than orderly. The Vethcon fleet retreated to 40 kilometers, then 60, then past the edge of the corridor's inner navigable zone into the nebular buffer. Communications opened on the emergency band. The Vethcon fleet commander sent a text-only transmission, no voice, no visual, that said, in the cooperative standard translation, "We are standing by for formal communication. We acknowledge the presence of additional cooperative forces. We request clarification of your legal authority under the emergency protocol." Commodore Akafer's response: "My legal authority is 67 ships. I'm happy to discuss the paperwork once your vessels are outside the corridor entirely." They left the corridor entirely. Inside OKV-9 there was a moment. After the hull alarms went quiet, after the liquid from Echo 2 had drained back through the failed door, after the all-clear started working its way through the unit channels, where nobody did anything. Not quite relief, not quite disbelief, something in between. I was standing in a centimeter of rapidly draining liquid with my weapon still up and Vieira next to me and Benicio next to him, and I realized my arms were shaking slightly, and I couldn't tell if it was adrenaline or cold, and I decided it was both, and that was fine. Vieira lowered his weapon first. Then he said very quietly, "Someone came." He'd said it before in the waiting. Someone always comes. I don't know if he'd believed it then. He believed it now. The 14th Combined Arms Battalion docked at OKV-9 over the following 40 minutes. Not all of them. 67 ships can't dock at one station simultaneously, and the battalion didn't try. They sent in 2 companies' worth of personnel on transports, while the rest maintained the tactical envelope outside. I was at the main receiving dock when the first transport locked on, and the doors opened. I don't know what I expected, something imposing maybe, something that matched the scale of what they'd just done, something big. What came through the door first was a woman who was, if anything, shorter than I am. Brown, like me, East African ancestry by the look of her, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of posture that doesn't have to announce itself. She was wearing standard combat cooperative uniform with Commodore insignia, and she was carrying a standard datapad, and she was walking at a pace that was brisk but not rushed, the pace of someone who has a specific next thing to do and intends to do it efficiently. Commodore Adiz Akefer. She looked at Cortez, who was at the receiving dock head with Oveth and Vel Sanath flanking her. "Sergeant First Class," she said. "Commodore," Cortez said. They assessed each other for about 2 seconds. "Your report mentioned 73% probability of a consolidation push," the Commodore said. "That was analyst Vel Sanath's figure," Cortez said. "I thought it was probably higher." "It was 100%, the Commodore said. "We had intercepted their operational orders 48 hours ago. They had already designated OKV-9 as their primary target for this push cycle." She paused. "I want to be direct with you. The response time you received from Joint Command was unacceptable. I intend to document that formally." Cortez said nothing for a moment. "Then I appreciate that, ma'am." "Your people held well," the Commodore said. She glanced at Oveth. "All your people." Oveth inclined his head. Not quite a bow. The Zelthran acknowledgement of a statement received and recognized. The Commodore looked down the receiving dock at the rest of us. The assembled section leaders, the NCOs, the people who'd been at the barriers and the junction posts, and the comm station for the last however many hours. "I understand you've had a long night," she said. Nobody said anything. Then Marco Delacroix, who was not supposed to be at the receiving dock, and who had come anyway because Marco Delacroix went where he felt like going on the grounds that it had not yet been specifically forbidden, said, "We could make gumbo, ma'am. I've got the recipe." There was a moment. The Commodore looked at him. She said, "What kind of gumbo?" "The kind that works with what we've got," he said, "which is most kinds." She considered this. "After the debrief," she said. "I'll hold you to it." Resolution. The debrief took 3 hours. In a conference room that used to be the station's shift supervisor office, which was small and poorly ventilated and not designed for the number of people now crammed into it, Commodore Akefer and her executive staff sat across from Cortez and Oveth and Vel Sanath and went through everything. The signal burst on day 6. The sensor failures. The probe at OKV-11. The intelligence picture that Vel Sanath had assembled. The tactical decisions during the boarding actions. The performance of each unit. It was thorough, it was respectful. And at one point, about halfway through, when Vel Sanath was walking through her intelligence analysis, one of the Commodore's staff officers, a young captain, can't have been much older than me, leaned forward and said, "I want to be clear. You built this picture from a single relay array signal burst, 2 sensor failures, and 1 probe incident at a neighboring station. That's it. And the elevated transmission strength of the signal burst," Vel Sanath said, "which I found significant." "That's extraordinary analytical work," the captain said. Vel Sanath blinked her large eyes at him. "I was working from limited data. I would prefer to have more data. The outcome was satisfactory, but the margin was uncomfortably narrow." "The margin," the captain said. 73%, she said. "I remain comfortable with that figure as a lower bound. The actual probability was higher. I was attempting to be conservative." The captain sat back and wrote something on his datapad, with the expression of someone revising a prior estimate. After the debrief, when the formal meeting was over and the conference room was clearing out, the Commodore pulled Cortez aside. I was near enough to hear, not trying to, just near enough. "Walk me through the decision to stage at 2/3 standby from day 11, the Commodore said. "I didn't like the pattern," Cortez said. "The data points added up to something I didn't want to be wrong about." Joint Command assessed it as within expected parameters. I know. They weren't wrong that the individual data points were within expected parameters, the Commodore said. No, Cortez agreed. They were wrong that that's how you assess a pattern. Silence for a moment. You've been doing this for 14 years, the Commodore said. Yes, ma'am. It shows. Cortez said, the boarding teams we stopped. They'll be processed and returned under the standard exchange protocol, the Commodore said. The Vethcon fleet commander has requested formal communication. We're going to give it to them. This particular push is over. She paused. The next one is a different problem. When? When is always sooner than you want, the Commodore said. That's why we're talking to you about what stays here. She met Cortez's eyes. I'm leaving 2 full companies, not a platoon, not a quick response team, companies with their own logistical support. OKV-9 becomes a properly garrisoned installation. Cortez was quiet for a moment. That would have been useful 3 weeks ago, she said. Not accusatory, just true. Yes, the Commodore said, it would have. Another pause. I've included that in my formal documentation. The response time, the resourcing, all of it. Cortez nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Thank your people, the Commodore said, and your Zelthran colleague, and your Marethi analyst, who is quite possibly the most valuable intelligence resource I've encountered in a corridor posting, and who I will be attempting to have formally reassigned to my staff, so please don't tell her yet. Cortez allowed herself a very small smile. Understood, she said. The gumbo happened. Marco made enough for everyone on the dock. The Echo Company survivors, the 2 Zelthran platoons, the Marethi team, about 30 soldiers from the battalion's advance element who were now stationed aboard, and Commodore Akafer herself, who showed up with her executive officer and 8 standing up at the serving counter with her datapad still in one hand. It was crowded and loud, and the station's cafeteria wasn't big enough, and people were sitting on equipment cases and standing in the corridor, and the Zelthran, who had now had the gumbo experience twice, were explaining it to the new battalion arrivals with the precise, detailed care of recent converts. Corporal Mara, the Zelthran with the dry sense of humor, was in conversation with a human corporal from Bravo Company, a tall Ugandan man named Apio, and I caught the end of what she was saying as I passed. The key is what humans call the rue. It requires patience. The humans understand that burning it ruins everything. This is one of the few areas in which their patience is reliable. Apio looked at her. One of the few areas, he said. Mara made what I had come to recognize as her version of a shrug. I have observed your species for 11 days. I remain in the early stages of my analysis. She's been talking like this since day 5, Benicio told Apio. It's affection. It takes a minute to read. I do not express affection, Mara said. Right, said Benicio. I express empirical assessment, she said. Sure, said Benicio. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Your gumbo evaluation on day 5, she said, which I overheard, whoever made this can cook, was that affection. That was a fact, Benicio said. Said Mara. Yes. Private Kelev, the young Zelthran who was fascinated by human teeth, had found a human corporal from the battalion willing to explain at length the evolutionary history of the human canine. He was taking notes, on an actual physical notepad, with a stylus, writing very carefully. Velsanath found me near the serving counter. She appeared at my elbow with the suddenness that Marethi specialize in. They move very quietly for a species, and said, I understand you were one of the units engaged at Echo 2. Yes, I said. I would like to include a detailed account of the engagement in my formal intelligence assessment. The tactical behavior of the boarding team, their response to the envelopment signal, the speed of their withdrawal is analytically valuable. She paused. If you are willing. Sure, I said. You were scared, she said. It wasn't a question. I considered it anyway. Yeah, I said, I was. The physiological markers of fear in humans are quite distinctive, she said. I observed them clearly in several personnel during the approach phase. The interesting element to me is that it did not appear to affect performance. She tilted her head, those large eyes thoughtful. In the literature on human military behavior, there is significant debate about this. The fear response is biologically quite intense, and yet the performance outcome does not reflect that. Well, I said, being scared doesn't mean you stop. She looked at me with the expression I had come to associate with her storing something for later use. I see, she said. That is, she paused. That resolves one of the contradictions in the literature. She went back to her datapad. I ate my gumbo. Sergeant Prime Oveth Keel was in the corner of the cafeteria, as he often was. He ate standing up, which was simply his habit. I brought my bowl over and stood near him because by now that was a thing that was okay between us. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, the Commodore is leaving 2 companies. I heard, I said. This was always the correct decision, he said. It should have been the decision 3 weeks ago. Yeah. The cooperative defense structure has systemic resource allocation problems, he said. This is not a new problem. It is a problem that is solved slowly, through formal channels, while people in places like this one solve it themselves through informal means. I know, I said. He looked at his food. The 6 soldiers we lost, he said. I waited. At the first Vethcon engagement, the one I told you about, he was quiet for a moment. I think about whether the resource allocation was different, whether we would have lost them. He paused. I have not resolved that question. Maybe you're not supposed to resolve it, I said. He looked at me. Maybe it just sits there, I said, and you carry it. He was quiet for a moment. Humans, he said, have a peculiar relationship with unanswerable questions. We're good at sitting with them, I said, not always. But sometimes. He made a sound that I had learned over 11 days was his version of acknowledgement. Low, brief, carrying more than it seemed. Yes, he said, I have observed that. We ate in silence for a while, a comfortable silence, the kind that builds over 11 days of being scared in the same cold room. Resolution: the aftermath. The formal cooperative report on the Kethvora corridor incident, filed under reference KVC 94471, runs to 230 pages. I've read most of it. It is thorough and accurate, and it reads like a document, which is to say it reads like something that has had all the cold and the fear and the gumbo carefully extracted from it and replaced with analysis. The analysis is not wrong. The analysis is good. Vel Sonoth's intelligence work is cited extensively, and her methods are described as exemplary and exceptionally well calibrated given available data, which is the kind of compliment that a formal report can give to something extraordinary, and which, I think, Vel Sonoth would find acceptable as a start. The report section on the boarding action at OKV-9 notes that all 3 insertion teams were repelled without defender casualties, a result attributable to appropriate prior preparation, effective multi-species coordination, and timely arrival of Battalion TH combined arms under Commodore Akafer. It does not say anything about the blast plating being rated to 700 kilopascals and the assault liquid operating at 1200, and the math on that being something we'd all been aware of. It does not say anything about what 3 minutes between the first door breach and the battalion's envelope locking in actually felt like. It does not say anything about the way Benicio Reyes asked about the gumbo recipe while we were waiting. That's fine. That's what formal reports are for. This is what personal accounts are for. The Vethcon consolidation fleet did not return to the corridor. Not immediately. They spent the next several weeks in a series of formal communications with the cooperative's diplomatic arm, communications which the cooperative, I'm told, I don't have clearance for the details, conducted from a position of considerably greater leverage than it had possessed at the beginning of the crisis. 2 companies of humans garrisoned at OKV-9, a properly resourced sensor array, a Marethi intelligence team operating with the cooperative's full analytical backing, and the very recent memory of 67 ships coming out of a navigable by no standard means nebular route at precisely the worst possible moment for the Vethcon's operational planning. Velsonoth was, as the Commodore had predicted, reassigned to the battalion's intelligence staff within 3 weeks. She sent me a brief message before she transferred. It read, "The empirical record of the engagement has been formally documented. The initial contradictions in the literature regarding human performance under acute stress have been substantially resolved. I would classify the interaction as net informative. Thank you for the data." I wrote back, "Anytime." She wrote, "I will hold you to that." Ovath and the Zelthrin platoon were rotated out after 30 days at OKV-9, replaced by a fresh platoon, a different unit, cooperative joint force, not Zelthrin specifically. Before he left, Ovath sought me out in Deck 7, which he had not been required to do, and told me that the 14th Combined Arms had performed adequately in his assessment. "Adequately," I said. "It is a high standard," he said. I looked at him for a second. "Is it higher than unexpected?" I asked. "The gumbo got unexpected." Unexpected was a specific observation made on day 5 before adequate data had been collected, he said. The data collected over 11 days supports the upward revision to adequate. "I'll take it," I said. He did a thing, a very small thing, with his face that I would swear was the beginning of a smile, except that Zelthrin faces don't precisely smile, and I'm not going to claim more than I observed. "You should," he said. He left. I stayed. I stayed at OKV-9 for another 4 months. Cortez stayed too. She was promoted to staff sergeant and given formal command of the Echo Company position, which had been the informal reality anyway and was now paperwork. She didn't make a thing of the promotion. She read the order, nodded, filed it, and went back to what she'd been doing, which was running the position the same way she always had. The station changed over those months, became more itself. The cafeteria got better equipment, real kitchen gear, not improvised. The environmental systems on Deck 7 were finally fixed. The temperature regulation that had been running 4 degrees cold since before we arrived, and the moment the heat came up properly, was genuinely the occasion of a small celebration, because it was the kind of thing that sounds trivial, but is not trivial at all when you've been cold for 4 months. New personnel came through. The 14th's 2 companies settled in. The cooperative joint force platoon that replaced Ovath's unit were slower to warm up, a different species, Threnish, who are careful and deliberate in everything they do and who needed about 2 weeks before they started coming to Deck 7 in the evenings. But they got there. Private Kelev had left with the Zelthrin, which felt like a loss, but his notes on human dental evolution were, I found out later, included in a small academic paper on cross-species anthropological observation that he co-wrote with a xenobiologist at the University of Keth Station. He thanked his human colleagues at OKV-9 in the acknowledgments. I saw it eventually. I read the acknowledgment several times. Marco Delacroix made the gumbo again, multiple times. It evolved. He got better equipment, better ingredients, more time to work with it. By the 3rd month it was less gesture toward gumbo and more actual gumbo. The recipe on the section com pad was updated with revisions. It became, in a small and unofficial way, a thing, a tradition. Something that happened on the first evening of every 30-day cycle, when whoever was on light duty gathered in the cafeteria and Marco cooked and people sat, and there was noise and talking and life. Ongoing, continuing, necessary life, in the middle of the HFY corridor, in the station that had almost not been ours to live in. The Vethcon negotiations stretched into formal talks that stretched into treaty discussions that were, as of my last posting, still ongoing in the way that treaty discussions between major powers are always ongoing, slowly, carefully, with each side testing the edges. The corridor remained contested in the technical diplomatic sense. In the practical sense, the chain of OKV stations was held and functioning and increasingly well-resourced, because the one thing that formal report accomplished with precision was establishing that under-resourcing a defensive position in the face of active hegemony pressure was a decision with documented, measurable consequences. Joint Command learned something. I hope they kept learning it. Ending line. I've been asked, since then, to describe what it felt like when the battalion came out of those gas clouds. Journalists have asked, veterans groups have asked, a documentary crew asked, and I sat in a chair in front of a camera and thought about it for a long time before I answered. The feeling I keep coming back to isn't triumph. It isn't even relief exactly, though relief was in there. It's something simpler. It's the feeling of standing in a cold cargo bay with 112 people and knowing in the way that bypasses analysis and logic and goes straight to somewhere deeper, that there are more of you than you thought, not because the numbers changed, not because the tactical situation became suddenly comfortable, but because the people who said someone always comes were right. And the people who got in their ships and flew through a nebular gas cloud that wasn't a navigable route in order to make that true had decided, apparently, that the algebra of the situation demanded nothing less than everything they had. That's a human thing. I know it's a human thing because I've talked to Zelthran soldiers about it and talked to Marethi analysts about it, and they understand it intellectually. They understand the tactical logic, the force multiplication, the strategic communication of commitment. But the why of it, the reason you fly through a cloud that isn't a route because 67 ships are the only number that sends the right message, the reason you show up not with the minimum sufficient force, but with an entire battalion. That one takes a little longer to explain. And usually, when I'm explaining it, the person I'm explaining it to looks at me with an expression that is somewhere between admiration and confusion. And I say, we don't do minimums, not when it's our people on the other side of the door. Mara told me once, in her dry, precise way, that she had resolved 3 years' worth of contradictions in the xenobiological literature on human military behavior over the course of 11 days on OKV-9. I asked her what the resolution was. She thought about it for a moment. You are afraid, she said, of exactly the same things as every other species. Loss, pain, the permanence of a mistake. You experience these fears with the same physiological intensity. A pause. But you have decided at some point in your evolutionary and cultural development that being afraid is insufficient reason to not show up. And more than that, she stopped. Considered. You have decided that the correct response to being asked for anything, when someone you care about is in danger, is to send everything you have. She looked at me. This is, objectively, not the most resource-efficient approach, she said. No, I agreed. And yet, she said. And yet. Outpost Halcyon, OKV-9, HFY corridor. 112 defenders, a cold cargo bay, a gumbo recipe on a comm pad, and 67 ships coming out of the dark. Because someone asked for reinforcements. And we don't do minimums. Corporal Dallas A. Reyes, 14th Combined Arms Battalion Echo Company. Filed under personal account, KVC-9 Incident Series, Cooperative Veterans Record Archive. Open classification. Tell it right, Sergeant Cortez said, when they asked me to record this. Tell all of it. So I did.